Bienvenidos a Bacardí México. Para nosotros es un honor tener en estas instalaciones el único edificio en América Latina de Mies van der Rohe, y es un verdadero gusto recibir el día de hoy a Dirk Lohan, arquitecto y nieto de Mies van der Rohe. Bienvenidos, gracias.
Hola, muy buenas tardes a todos. A nombre de la Federación de Colegios de Arquitectos de la República Mexicana, les doy la más cordial bienvenida y hoy nos encontramos en un magnífico y estupendo lugar que es diseñado por el arquitecto Mies van der Rohe, un ícono para todas y todos los arquitectos de México y del mundo.
En nombre de la Asociación de Instituciones de Enseñanza de la Arquitectura de la República Mexicana, ASINEA, le queremos dar las gracias a la Federación de Colegios de Arquitectos de la República Mexicana por esta invitación a escuchar esta ponencia del arquitecto Lohan, quien es nieto de Mies van der Rohe, y qué mejor lugar que las oficinas de Bacardí, diseñadas por el arquitecto Mies van der Rohe. Disfruten esta proyección.
Damas y caballeros, that's the extent of my Spanish. It gives me pleasure to be here very much, because I heard about this building for many, many decades already. And in my youth, as a very young architect in Chicago, I worked and built a model of the Bacardí building in the workshop of my grandfather. My grandfather in his office didn't just have architect's tables, but also a workshop with machines and all kinds of tools that were very popular by us younger architects. So in gratitude for the reception here and the welcoming, I put together a few slides of Mies's work and continued into my own work because it's interconnected and related quite a bit. Mies, as you know, I will call him Mies because everybody does. In my family, he wasn't called Mies. He was called Pa. But that's in America, he's Mies, as if it was his first name. And his parents, you see here on the picture, in Aachen. Aachen, Aix-la-Chapelle, is on the Dutch border between Germany and Holland. And he grew up in Aachen. The father was a stonemason. I don't know if you understand what stonemason means. He had a shop working with stones and gravestones and decorations, etc. And was a great influence on the young Mies. And Mies learned the trades for building things in brick and plaster, and he was also very much influenced by the architecture of the region in northwestern Germany, not far from Cologne. This is the Gothic Cathedral in Cologne. Is Colonia or whatever? Yeah. And one day, when he was already in Berlin and he visited his family, he heard his older brother, who inherited the stone shop from his father, saying to his father, "Why do we spend so much time on this piece of stone? It goes on top of the building, nobody will see it." And the father said, "Hey, son, please remember, these decorations that we make on top of buildings, they're made for God and not for you to see and criticize." Which was something that Mies often told, stories like that. He was famous for saying God is in the detail. In other words, in the precision, in the refinement, that is godlike. What happened now? So he moved in his late teens to Berlin, because as a second son, the old system in Europe was that the first son will inherit the business of the father or the parents, and the second son will have to go and find something else. So he had to do something else. He went to Berlin because somebody had shown him some pictures and persuaded him to come to Berlin. And when he was 20 years old, he was hired by a professor of philosophy at the university, Professor Rehl, to build him a private house in the suburb of Berlin, which is called Potsdam, where the castle of the Queen's Castle was. And this is that house. He's 21 years old. He designed a house as a young man. And in these years, from 1908 on, he worked in Berlin until after World War I in a more traditional style. That's what he had learned. That was the craft that his early years in Berlin, as I said, he was more a classical, traditional architect. Then he worked for Peter Behrens, who was a major industrial architect in Germany. And at the time he was in that office, Le Corbusier was in that office, Gropius was in that office, and of course Mies van der Rohe. They all worked for Peter Behrens, for one well-known architect. And this was the German electrical company, AEG, and this is the turbine hall where they produce turbines. But that is not quite the sequence I have in mind. But anyway, this then in 1920, after World War I, there was a change of mood and thinking in Europe, and particularly in Berlin, Germany, and the artists wanted to change and do contemporary, modern things, style work, and Mies joined that and proposed some high-rise buildings in glass and steel for a major architects competition in Berlin at the Bahnhof Friedrichstraße. Bahnhof means railroad station. So this is right in the center of Berlin. In recent years, it was right there where the wall was between East and West Berlin. And this building was very widely noticed and exhibited, but he didn't win the competition at all. It was somebody who built not a particularly good building. So he became famous for this design, but unbuilt. Here you see on the left one of his other glass high-rises, and the building in Chicago. There are two students that worked with him under his tutelage at the Illinois Institute of Technology. They built this apartment building on the right side. It's called Lake Point Tower. It's a wonderful building and very much inspired and similar to Mies's shape round building for the Berlin situation. So that's when he established his early reputation as a modern architect in Berlin. One of the talents he had, he sketched very well. He could draw a little picture of something. And you see one of these early sketches here of a house in the landscape with some sculpture outside, and that, of course, is an ability and a talent that many architects have or would like to have. Then he began to design more modern buildings, and this is a famous house which is now part of the World Heritage Fund. It's the Tugendhat House in Brno, Czechoslovakia. Not very far from Vienna, north of Vienna. When you go from Austria over the border into Czechoslovakia, Brno is one of the towns. It's an industrial, it was or is still an industrial city, and there was a German-speaking Jewish family, the Tugendhat family, that had factories there, and they wanted to build a house for their daughter's wedding. So that was the gift that Mies, she hired Mies, because they used to spend time in Berlin in cultural circles, and they met each other at the Professor Riel's house, the early house that he designed. They had parties there, and important people would come and go. I remember Mies telling me that when I was young, and the first time I was invited to one of the real parties, I had to put on a tuxedo and black lacquered shoes, and the floor was so polished it was like skating, you know. I mean, it was a big experience for him becoming from a simple background in Aachen. And he designed this, he met at the real house. Also, I should mention my grandmother, who gave him 3 daughters in the 20s, through the beginning of the century. And they all lived in Berlin. And then during these years, he was made himself more independent. They didn't have a divorce, but they separated, and he lived alone. He preferred to live alone all the rest of his life. This house, I have some interior pictures. You see related environment, interior environment, to even this here. One of the things that Mies was very interested in and very successful in was to separate the walls of a building, the dividing walls between rooms and spaces, from the structure of the building. So this is the first time he showed the columns that hold up the roof and the next floor, separated from the walls, which meant that the walls are not load-bearing, if you can understand what I mean. They can be changed around and taken out, and the building will not fall down, which was really an innovative concept. And you see that here, these highly polished columns are freestanding from the window wall where the curtains are, etc. It's a very elegant house, very large house, and he designed some of the furniture for it as well. And there is a chair, not unlike the Barcelona chair, but the so-called Tugendhat chair, which is a different structure, but it's a metal frame with leather seating. The other building that he did at the same time is the Barcelona Pavilion, which was the German exhibition at the World's Fair in 1929 in Barcelona. And he was hired by the foreign ministry, and they said, we would like you to design us a pavilion that represents Germany. Now, this was only a few years after World War One. And he said, well, what is a pavilion? They said, we don't know. The French have one, the British have one, we need one too. So he then came up with this concept of doing a wonderful artistic piece of space with stone and some glass and marble, wonderful North African marble. And here you see a picture of the view of the courtyard. There's a courtyard with some water on the floor, and Tinos, the green Tinos Greek marble around a sculpture by a German artist, Kolbe is his name. And it was a highly noted and admired project. And one of the people from the United States that actually knew this building, had seen it, was Philip Johnson as a young man. So you may have heard of Philip Johnson. I'm sure some of the architects know who that was. He had seen this building and became an admirer of Mies. Oh, yeah, that is a picture of him at the time in the late 30s, what he looked like when he came to America. You see, just so you know what he was like, what his appearance was, and he became the director of the architecture school at the Illinois Institute of Technology, and was teaching there and leading the school from 1940 through the 50s. So it was 20 years, something like that. And had a great influence because several hundred young architects went through the school, and many of them have populated, particularly Chicago, but other cities in the US as well. I went there myself when he was still the director there for a year, and then I went back to Germany to study architecture at the Technical University in München. So I have a degree from München. I'm a German diploma engineer architect, but nobody in America has ever held that against me. So, this is a picture of Chicago at the time he came to Chicago. And I included it here to show you how it was a big city already with high-rise buildings and some major works, and some major architects had developed works there, like Frank Lloyd Wright, Louis Sullivan, etc. And but it was, when I look at this picture carefully, compared to what is today, it looks underdeveloped. There are many new buildings in the front, on the lakefront, in the parks. We have a very nice scenery because of Lake Michigan that looks from the city like an ocean. It's that big. You don't see the other shoreline across the lake. And I included this picture as a reminder that in 1938, when he came to Chicago, he and had lived in Berlin since 1933, which is the beginning of the dictatorship of the Nazis. He was out of work. He was one of the not approved architects. And it was a really difficult time for him. He didn't build anything. He designed a few things on paper, but he survived and supported himself with the income from these chairs that you have here. They're still being manufactured and they're still popular these days, today. One of the first, I mentioned, he was in charge of the architecture school. Here you see the building he created for that school, architecture school. It's called Crown Hall, which, just so you understand, the word crown is the name of the donor of the money for the project. It doesn't have much to do with real crowns. But this is the building he designed, and this is what it looks like from the outside today in Chicago. It's a very popular school, and the school is very successful today. They have well over 1,000 architects each year that come there. So it's a big school and still very popular. This building manifests or shows another one of his concepts and his ideas to make open, flexible spaces that can be rearranged freely without the disturbance of, in other words, the first step was separating the structure from the walls. And then he built these things, a very big hall without any column inside at all. So there was nothing that was limiting the rearrangement as the building is used, and maybe the purpose and the functions change over time. You all probably, or many of you, have seen this little house. It's outside Chicago, the Farnsworth House. It was a woman doctor that built it as a weekend house, and it's basically one large space divided by a freestanding core element with wood panels like here, and then on the other side would be the kitchen, and on another end the bedroom and so on. But there were no closed rooms with doors, and the outside was all glass. And it sits on a large property where you can look into the greenery, into the trees. And I was reminded yesterday when we visited Luis Barragan's home here in Mexico City, and the relationship of some of his rooms to the greenery, the garden that he had outside, which is now looks like a jungle today. I don't think it was that way when he built the house. But so this house is now a museum, and the people come from around the world, literally, I mean, from Japan and from Germany and from wherever. It's a very famous little house, the Farnsworth House. And it's painted white, I should mention that, because it's in the country where the air is clean, unlike the air in the war in 1950s when these things were created. In Chicago, the pollution of the air was very strong because they heated the whole city with coal, black coal. So there was a lot of soot flying around. And nice buildings in natural stone with time became black or darker. And he wanted to avoid that problem. So in Chicago, he painted his buildings black, like this here. Maybe he thought that Mexico City has a similar problem, I don't know. But in the country, he used white. That is about, I have been now in Chicago since the early 60s. I worked in his office, I was close to him, and then I did design some furniture for the Farnsworth house, which you see here. It's a desk, and because the house had no bookshelves, really, I made some bookshelves on the right and the left of the desk surface that is cantilevered out from the body of the desktop. These are the first high-rise apartment buildings, 860, 880 Lakeshore Drive in Chicago. My wife and I live on the top floor of one of these buildings, and my son lives in another building right on the water, on the lake, as you can see there. They are glass and steel buildings, not unlike what you see here. The steel mullions and the glass, floor-to-ceiling glass, very similar in many ways. I can't tell what it is. Oh, they are the same building. The same buildings in a finished condition and in construction. It's a steel frame building, all steel frame building. And what is interesting that we experience when the wind blows over the lake hard and strong, they start swaying a little bit. And it's not scary, but it's an experience to be had. We have a sculpture hanging from the ceiling in one room, and it starts swinging when the wind blows, because the building moves. Another major project that he did for the city of Chicago is the Federal Center. It's a large complex of government buildings, courtrooms, agencies of the government like the FBI and so on. They're in these buildings right downtown. And on the plaza, you see a sculpture that is Alexander, Calder. A beautiful big sculpture in painted red. Yeah, at that time, when I was now working in his office, there was this plan, which is the original Havana Bacardí floor plan for the building that Mies designed for the Bosch family in Havana. And unfortunately, it was not built there because when Fidel Castro came out of the jungle into Havana, he declared that he will disappropriate property from private investment, and the family, the Bacardí family, decided, no, we don't want to have much to do with that, and moved away to Mexico City. So this is the Cuba version of the building, and that particular model that you see here, I built in the shop. Then I also was involved from day one with the National Gallery in Berlin, which is a museum of contemporary art that West Berlin commissioned at that time, because Berlin was divided. And they were very generous and wanted very much to have a Mies building in Berlin, a major building. And he wanted very much to do something in Berlin because he was so influenced his young years of working with Peter Behrens, and another architect he admired greatly was Schinkel, the classicist of the city of Berlin. All the big buildings there were Schinkel buildings. So this is a takeoff of the Havana building, which was done in concrete. This is done in steel. And because I spoke German and English, from the Chicago office, I was the one that traveled regularly to Berlin to oversee this project. So I was involved in that. And here you see a a picture of the square roof, the dark black because it's steel, and the sculpture garden on the right side, and the big plaza surrounding the exhibition hall. And that where many, many exhibitions in the last 50 years have been exhibited. All the great modern contemporary artists have practically been in there now. And here you see a picture, and I show it to you because it was fascinating what we did then. The whole roof, about 80 meters. Yeah, about 80 meters square was assembled welded together on the ground. And the thickness of the beams was 6 feet, almost 2 meters, 1 meter 80. And you see the plate. And then in one day, the company that was building this scheduled it in such a way that the roof would be raised hydraulically in one day. And they chose the day of the Congress of the Concrete Association of Germany. They had their meeting right in that building in the background there, which is the Philharmonic Hall. And in the morning when they went in, they saw a big steel plates lying on the ground. And when they came out, there was a building. And you see it here going up. And the columns were attached, and they went eventually straight up like this, and then a little down, and the building was finished. Quite impressive. And what's happening now? You see an interior view here with some art in the building, and the big hanging walls. This is the height of that museum is about maybe from the ground floor here to here. I mean, whatever that is, dimension. It's a very high space, and you need big walls to show the art. The first exhibition, this is not the first exhibition, was a Montreal exhibition because that abstract art from that Dutch artist related in the thinking of the museum to Mies's work. Then at that time also, towards the end of his life, he did a wonderful building in Chicago, the IBM building for the IBM company. I worked on that building, and over the years I've worked and helped to keep it up. And about 12 years ago or so, we put in a third of the building is now a Langham Hotel. And it's interesting how easy it was to convert a major office building into a very nice high-end Langham Hotel. It speaks to the, shall we say, the logic of separating structure from walls, and that you can change things and make it relatively easy. I then, after Mies died in '69, I was one of the architects, continued his office, and one of the big jobs I got was the McDonald's headquarters project for the food company that you all know about. Do you have McDonald's in Mexico? Really? I haven't seen one yet. Anyway, I designed a whole campus for them with a lake that we artificially dammed up a little creek river, and it's become a beautiful large buildings for the world headquarters for the company. And the structure is in concrete, and the facades are mostly with the local Midwestern brick, sort of an orange, reddish brown brick. Here you see another picture. There's a hotel that McDonald's owns, which is this picture on the lake. So it was a wonderful project for a young architect like me. And the chairman of the company, when he wanted to he selected me and called me one day, and I drove out there to meet him. He said, Dirk, I want to give you this project, but I don't want a Mies building. I want a Dirk Lohan building. So I was challenged to become myself. Here is another building in recent years that I did. It's an office building in Chicago. And in the background, you see the taller building. That's the Trump Tower, I think. And the darker building in between the two is the IBM building that I showed you before. So it's right on the river of Chicago. It's a major location. That facade of that building, here you see it, and particularly the one feature of the building is that the corner offices on every floor are without a column in the corner. So when you're in that office, if you're the executive of Bacardí and you have an office there, you have a vista going from one end to the other without a column in the middle. You see that here on this corner detail. Other buildings I have done, library. This is a library outside Chicago in the suburb. I had a lot of influence over the years on the front yard of Chicago. This is the area in the front of the city called Grant Park. And there's the football stadium that was built in the 20s called Soldier Field. About 20 years ago, I was commissioned to do a new football stadium inside the old one. And that's what you see here, the stadium. And then on the right, there are two other museums. One is an aquarium where we designed some exhibits for whales and dolphins, which are not in our lake. So Chicagoans like to see something bigger than big fish, and planetarium to look at the sky. Very famous, the Adler Planetarium. I did each one of these buildings. And here you see the stadium again, the modern seating shells surrounded by the historical facade of Soldier Field from 1920. So it was a museum, it was a stadium built to commemorate the soldiers of World War I. That's why it's called Soldier Field. That's the aquarium facade we designed. There you see the performance of how the water pool is directly on the perimeter of the building overlooking Lake Michigan, and it creates the illusion that you're on the ocean. There is a performance by one of the curators, and you see a dolphin flying through the air there, jumping out of the water. That's, of course, is an attraction for the visitors. So I'm almost getting to the end of it. Another house, a house I designed. I did a few private homes, over the years. This one is in Michigan, in the state of Michigan, in the woods on a clearing, and it's a Rubik cube. It has the same dimension, square dimension in every elevation and in the floor plan. And the way you go up is sort of a circular stair system. Very nice house. I would like to live there myself, but it's owned by somebody who likes it. There's a more detailed view. Another house in Chicago, in the city, with the surface of the exterior is terracotta, with a rain screen system, which means that the joints are open and the water can go through the stone, and then there is a waterproofing behind. And this is a very popular or very well thought of house that recently has been sold for quite a bit of money. That's a view inside the house with the main stair going up and down. Yeah, I designed on the Chicago River. You see this fountain with that water shooting across? There is a fountain that was designed to commemorate the 100th anniversary of the reversal of the flow of the Chicago River. And they reversed the flow from flowing into the lake, like nature made it. Because the early development of the city, all the sewage, all the bad water was run into the river and it flowed into the lake. And the beaches were poisonous and diseases developed. And they came up with a brilliant idea to stop the flow and dig some low water and allow the river to flow not into the lake, but away from the lake. So it's a very unusual river flow. And this fountain is the memorial fountain of 100 years after it was done. That we designed. It shoots water across the river to like a welcoming arch from the lake. So, almost finished. This is a project in Sao Paulo, a hotel. I did a number of hotels over the years. You see here the terrace deck. Oh, this is a Four Seasons hotel in Mumbai, India. That is we did in 20 years ago, maybe. Can hardly tell what this is. Oh, this is the room. Here's another hotel in Mumbai at the airport. So I would like to come back to your building briefly, which of course I had nothing to do with, but I am so pleased to be here and speak with you and learn about your admiration for this building and the way my congratulations on maintaining it so well. It looks splendid. And thank you for your hospitality. These are some drawings that Mies did for the Bacardí building in Havana. Perspective. And then I would like to mention Felix Candela did some of your factory buildings here. And he was a friendly, I don't want to say friend of mine, but I knew him quite well. I met him several times. And I had always admired his concept, which was innovative, totally innovative. So again, thank you very much. Appreciate it. And I'd like to look at Candela's work too. Thank you.
Muy buen día tengan todos ustedes. Yo soy José Luis Cortés, presidente de la Unión Internacional de Arquitectos, mexicano, y con mucho gusto me ha tocado el día de hoy participar en la clausura de la conferencia que acaba de dar el arquitecto Dirk Lohan, el nieto de Mies van der Rohe. Y Dirk Lohan participó junto con Mies van der Rohe en muchas de las construcciones que hizo, tanto en Chicago como en Berlín. De manera que el haber participado en este evento ha sido un gran privilegio. Ciertamente, el estar en las instalaciones de Bacardí es algo que debieran de hacer todos los arquitectos que visitan a México de diferentes partes del mundo, porque no es solamente la obra de Mies van der Rohe la que se encuentra aquí, sino también la de Félix Candela, dos grandes personajes que enarbolan la arquitectura y dejaron una huella en este lugar. Muchas gracias y felicidades a todos.